Peace, what's going on? Have you ever wanted to get involved in real estate wholesaling, but just didn't know how? Well, my good friend Chris Jefferson has a whole course that he offers that teaches you all the ins and outs of real estate wholesaling. Look below in the show notes, you'll see a link that you can click on where you can get more information about the courses in which he offers. Showing you how to get started in real estate wholesaling, how to get leads, how to promote yourself online. So definitely look below in the show notes, click on the link, get more information, and learn how to build your business. All right? Take care. Peace.
And of course, our parents are still telling us, be safe, be safe, be safe. And that's because the history with us in this country, but also the things we do to ourselves. We have to start circulating our own dollars. And I tell people, I try to buy as many African-American things as possible. People that come into my home are African-American. And that's no disrespect to any other group, because I, of course, there's things that only certain groups have monopolies on, and I get that. But from my air to my lawn to everything, they're Black men. Right. And that's purposeful for me, because for them, this is creating generational wealth. And also, too, we have to get our kids involved in what we're doing so they can take over it. Right. We think about the Russell family and those things in Atlanta who have built so many buildings, Herman Russell. And I tell people, you read the story about Herman Russell and how much he has built all the way around Atlanta. His children are now running that business, which is a $1 billion business.
Malik's First Job Podcast, here to answer any questions that y'all ask. Financial literacy and resources, parents and young people becoming bosses, CEOs, future leaders, entrepreneurs, conferences and boardrooms getting sponsors secured. If you want generational wealth, Brooklyn's own Kerwin Phillip with information to help. Malik's First Job Podcast, Malik's Podcast, Brooklyn's own Kerwin Phillip, Kerwin Phillip. Malik's First Job Podcast, Brooklyn's own Kerwin Phillip. Generational wealth.
Hi, greetings. How are you doing today? This is Kerwin Phillip with another episode of the Malik's First Job Podcast, where we speak about leadership, entrepreneurship, and financial literacy for parents and teens. Today, our guest is Miss LaShawn E Mikell, Esquire. She's a licensed attorney and has practiced law for 22 years. She is a trained mediator and financial arbitrator with FINRA. She became a licensed attorney in the state of Georgia in 2001. LaShawn is a graduate of the University of North Carolina School of Law in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, where she received her Juris Doctor in the year 2000. In 1997, she graduated magna cum laude with a Bachelor of Art degree in political science from the great Morgan State University in Baltimore, Maryland. She's a native of Jersey City, New Jersey, and has resided in the Atlanta metro area for 22 years. So I want to go ahead and welcome Miss LaShawn E Mikell. How you doing, sis?
How are you, sir? And thank you so much for having me. I'm so proud of you and all that you're doing. Mr. Kerwin Phillips and Malik's First Job. Of course, I'm an owner of the books. I would recommend, I've read the book. I would definitely recommend that you all get on it if you haven't gotten on it. And what a wonderful platform. So thank you so much for the opportunity to speak about my business, and that aligns so much with what you're doing and having me. So I definitely appreciate that.
Well, thank you for agreeing to join us today. So tell us more about your business and what you do.
Well, as Kerwin announced, everyone, I'm LaShawn E Mikell, Esquire. I'm the founder and CEO of Cycles of Life Estate Planning Company, where we're moving people from financial security to financial freedom while building a financial legacy that will last a lifetime. And what we do is we assess, we consult, and then execute on your estate planning and financial needs. So not only do I do assessments for your finances and also estate things that you need to prepare for in the event of your death, but also we do assessments of a life insurance and other financial tools to help you build financial and generational wealth, and also legal document drafting, the main pillars of estate planning: wills, trust, power of attorney, and advance directives.
Okay. So just to kind of start off, for those that aren't familiar with estate planning, can you please elaborate on what estate planning is?
Well, estate planning is Also, as all we usually know it as, is preparing for your death. We all know that death is certain. We know that that is going to come. And estate planning is making sure that your affairs are in order. So when your family goes to probate your estate, which is the legal term for going to the courthouse to execute what your desires are once you pass away, then that is pretty much the basis of estate planning. What we're also trying to get people to do is there are things that's in your estate planning portfolio that should align with your financial portfolio in regards to also having and creating generational wealth, but also using some of those financial tools while you are alive. But the traditional definition of estate planning is making sure that the documents and legal things are in place. So once your family goes to probate your estate, it is free and clear and it's not a lot of fighting. What we hear a lot is heir property, particularly in the African American community, where families have generational land that has been passed on, but there's no legal document documenting the land besides the deed of the property. And so you hear all the time heir property. There was a big thing about this in Savannah, Hilton Head, and other concentrated Black areas in the South where people are losing their lands to the government, also through eminent domain, but also through private corporations when they want to build a subdivision or something new. One family member sells it off and then the other ones are fighting. If you have documents in place like a will, a trust that you can put the land in, particularly unoccupied land, that could sit in a trust. So once your family, goes to probate your estate, if you put your land in trust or any important things that you have in trust, there's no probate involved at all. It just goes to the designated beneficiaries. So that's why it's so important to have these things in place, because what will happen if you do not have a will, at least outlining who you want your property to go to, it will go into what we call intestate secession. And what that means is that it's considered heir property, and then it would just succeed from one person to another. So for your example, using you as an example, Kerwin, so you have a wife and children. And what will happen is it will go to your wife and then to your children. If your wife is deceased or predeceased, then it would go to your children and it would be divided evenly among your children. And then so on and so forth. So it always starts there if you do not have a will. The problem with that is that everyone seems to think they're entitled. And what winds up happening with so many families is that they wind up having to divide property into 32, 1 and 32 thirds and all these things. And so by the time the property is distributed out, no one has any kind of control over it. And what winds up happening, the family winds up selling it and then splitting the proceeds. And as I tell people, land is not growing. We're not, whatever land is on this earth, it is it. Land cannot be man-made. You can man-made a beach, you can put a pond somewhere, but you got to have land that's on it, and there's no more land left. What is out here is what is out here. And what's out here, we're seeing all over the world, people are fighting over it. So at the end of the day, to avoid that, you want to have important legal documents in place outlining your desires and not just telling your family, because that's one thing, but death just creates a strange bedfellow, particularly if there's resources that's left behind. And everything that you said it to your wife or your children, one child will say something different than everyone else, even though you've had this conversation over and over again. So that's why it's so vitally important to have your estate planning affairs in order.
Okay. So can you please, I guess, let the audience know what's the difference between a will and a trust?
So a will is just a legal document that basically says you have an executor or executrix or the person who will execute and probate your estate, and then you have beneficiaries. You can include anything in that will that you want to, tangible and intangible items. And then the difference versus a trust, well, a trust could be living, it could be irrevocable, it could be revocable. And I talk about that on my page, the differences between them. But the main thing is that you're really putting high-end, high-value items into a trust. Land, a piece of art, if you have a Warhol or Baptiste, those are the things you want to put in the trust. You're not putting necessarily a car in trust. The difference between that is if you have a living trust, you can move things in and out and provide tax protection for those items while you are alive. And you would be the only person with the living trust, if you are the trustee or the person who created the trust, to be able to move, keep things in and out. And also there'll be a discussion with your beneficiary. So you definitely, the difference between that is that you have a lot of autonomy with the trust while you are alive. A will is only going to be executed at your death. The myth that a lot of people have is that your will is sitting at a courthouse. It usually is not. Some states require your will to be filed with the clerk's office at the probate court. Most places like Georgia, I believe Virginia is also, but Virginia is a commonwealth, so they have two different sets of laws working. So I don't want to misquote what Virginia law is without researching. But most of the time, your family member will take your will to the courthouse to be probated. The difference between that and a trust, if you have items in trust, those items cannot be touched by a court or anyone else, and you do not have to go through the probate process, which could be expensive and also time consuming if you don't have the proper documents in place.
Okay.
But you're going to have to pay at least a filing fee to probate anything. You will spend money just to start.
So would you say it's better to have a trust as opposed to the will, or maybe have both?
Both if you need it. I think the big thing is that a lot of times, depending on what you have, you may not need it. If you have property, a lot of people ask me all the time, can you put your home in a trust? You can put a paid for home in a trust. So for example, if your parents left a home, but they have a home, or they have a home that they inherited from a family member after they died, and they have it sitting somewhere in another state,
Right.
they can put that piece of property in trust if it's paid for. The issue that most people run into about putting their own home in trust, which a lot of people try to do, is your mortgage company is not going to do that if you owe a mortgage on it. So if it's not paid for, you're clear, it's much more difficult, and most mortgage companies and lenders will not allow you to do that. So yes, I tell people, if you have land or property, particularly unoccupied property that's sitting in another state, say you have property in Georgia and you are in Virginia now, and I know you all have moved from Georgia to Virginia. Mm-hmm. If you have a piece of property that's in Georgia that's sitting dormant, that would be what I recommend to put in trust. One bit for your protection, and also you can still maneuver with it estate-wise while you are alive. And it protects you from certain tax benefits. There are also protections from lawsuits and other things if your estate dies and you owe billions of dollars. Once this book blows up and you have trademark and all these things, and someone says, well, he took my idea, because they'll wait till you die and say, well, Malik's first job was my idea. I talked to Kerwin about that. We were in chemistry class at Morgan, or whatever. And then they can't really touch that. They may be able to touch some other things, but not that. So trust is a good protection. And as I said, probably the most beneficial thing about having a trust is you don't have to take it to probate, your family. But again, everything that you own does not need to go in a trust. Trusts are very expensive to create. And also they're hard to go back in and out if you don't have it set up properly. So it's a little more cumbersome. It's a little more expensive for a lawyer to do that for you. However, it is a protection, but it's not for certain things. If you have a 1954 Maserati, you might want to put that in the trust, because I think people think, well, I can put all these classic cars and different things in trust. It really needs to be high end, and the highest thing you can have and put into a trust really is land, because the value of land hardly ever depreciates. If it is unoccupied and nothing is on top of the land, it usually is appreciating. And so I would say the most important thing to put into a trust is if you have some property that is sitting and right now there's no claim to it, and you don't have, your will doesn't outline that. But if it's just sitting and there's no one really dealing with the land for the protection of the lands, and no one else can come and lay claim on it or put a lien on it or other things, I would say put that in a trust. And as I said, it's beneficial while you are alive.
Okay. So, like for parents that, that have assets, that want to pass them down to their children, what is the best approach to educating their children about these different documents and how to execute them, in their untimely passing?
Right. Well, the one thing I tell people, the first thing that most estate planning attorneys are going to tell you to get started is create an inventory list. It is shocking to me how many people don't even know how many 401k accounts they have from jobs. You're on your sixth job or seventh job after college or after graduate school or after you get your MBA, and you've had jobs that you vested, or there was a plan you signed up for and you forgot. And so that's very hard to track. It's easy because it's probably the usual suspects as your beneficiaries. It's probably your spouse and or your children. However, if your children are minors at your death, they don't have access to it. And if something happens like divorce, I see that a lot where people have divorced and they forget to take their spouse off. Then the spouse gets the money, then they don't tell the children, or you don't know what the relationship is. And so the first thing I tell people is sit down and create an inventory list for your tangible and intangible items. And what I mean by that, every bank account you have, every retirement plan you have, if you have a 529 for your children, you need to have all those things in place, and you need to list the account, the company or agency that is with, a contact number, and who are the beneficiaries. Because the minute you passed away, you want to notify all of these agencies and facilities. And that is hard to do if your children are in the throes of planning your funeral, planning your arrangements, also trying to now gather up documents. And this is something I just tell families, the first thing you have to do before you create the inventory list is sit down with your children and tell them what you have. I think sometimes parents think, well, I don't want to tell my children that because they already think we're rich, every pair of sneakers and all the things. And I get that, but something as important as this, you need to tell. And more than your spouse, more than your partner, more than your significant other, because more than likely, your children will be doing the bulk of your estate planning. Just because sometimes emotionally, and there's just an expectation. When my mom passed away, my dad wasn't doing any of this. It was my sister and I doing all of the heavy lifting. And luckily, my mom had discussed this with us. So before anything else, I would tell you, you need to have a family discussion. But you also need to be creating an inventory list of all your tangible and intangible items that you want your family to keep, distribute out to someone else, and they need to know who you want that stuff to go to. Once you create the inventory list, because when you go into an estate planning office, whether it's you use me or someone else, the first thing we're going to tell you, we need an inventory list because we don't know what you have and we need to get that. And you'll be surprised how long it takes people. I did a consultation with a family from Morgan State, and the parent, and they did it for their parents, and it was amazing. They had no idea. Their mom had retired from a hospital 10 years ago, but she stayed there 15 years. And I was like, she probably has some type of pension or something sitting. And I hate to tell people, no one is calling you to tell you Kerwin has $50,000 sitting somewhere. They're not calling. And so if your family is not aware, that money is just going to cheat to the state or sit there. Very rarely will they call. My mom had a bunch of hospital jobs in New Jersey, and I had to call. You have to send a death certificate, all those things. But I was aware of them. And I always think my mom has an insurance policy somewhere, and I just don't know anything about it. But again, that's why it's so vitally important to write it down so you don't have to worry about that, and your children are not fighting with that. And once you create the inventory list, put the list up. Save it electronically because we're in a new time now. So it's not like when our parents was coming up when they had only a safe deposit box. Yes, if you have a safe deposit box, great. Be careful with safe deposit box because if you don't have your children on the box to go into the box, they can't get into the box. So those are other things that we have to remember that, we have all these things in place, but then we don't provide our young people and or our spouse and partners the access to get the things. So I was like, if you're the only person on the safe deposit box and you pass away, then not letting your family in the safe deposit box. Trust me. Right. And so you definitely want to get that. And so those are things to do. The other big thing I always tell people, make sure you have PODs or paid upon death on your bank accounts and your other financial accounts. If you have investments, usually you need a POD and you'll see it. And a lot of times most banks will tell you when they're asking you, well, Mr. Phillips, who would you like us to leave this? Who would you like to have access to your account? Usually that's the bank kind of putting someone as a POD, but there are forms to fill out specifically to do that. So don't assume because your wife is the co-signee on your bank account that she's your POD. She may not be. You may put one of your children as a POD and your wife just has access to the money while you're alive. So that's why it's important to make sure that you check all of your bank accounts. And the tips that I'm giving are things that people can do without a lawyer. So this is the thing I tell people, start off, because all that's going to happen is you're going to pay a lawyer a consultation fee, and then you're going to come right back and they're going to give you a list of things to do. So I'm trying to alleviate and cut out that next consultation fee. Go in and say, okay, I have an inventory list. I know all my retirement accounts. I have my beneficiaries identified, etc. So that's the first thing I would tell people to do. Start with an inventory list and make sure you are educating yourself and your children and your loved ones where these items are, what is on them, and how to execute them upon your death.
Peace, peace, peace. What's going on? This is Kerwin Phillip from the Malik's First Job Podcast. Just a quick reminder, hit that subscribe button below and that notification bell. That way you never miss an episode when it drops. All right? Thank you all for supporting, and let's jump back into the conversation. Peace. Okay. Now, I want to get your thoughts on something. Now, this may be like slightly off of what we're talking about.
Okay.
Now, this is a statistic that says that 70% of generational wealth is lost from the first to the second generation. And then that 90% is lost from the second to the third generation, right? What's your thoughts on that? And what can we do to, I guess, to kind of deviate from those numbers, make those numbers, look a little bit better within our community?
You're right. I touched on this a couple of months ago. I did a month about generational wealth. And the first thing I said is generational wealth only lasts 3. So if you go back, there's a video with me holding up 3. That is in fact true. And for us, the demographics is worse. Some of us are not making it to a second generation. And I know we see, and I tell people, just look at what happened to Prince. Just look at what happened to Prince. And I'm certain a person who, of course, me and you are both big rap fans, just like Jay-Z said in the song. There's no way a man wrote Slave on his face and then expected his estate to be like this. But again, because we always think someone is trying to take for us. So one is that's why it's so important for people like you and me to be out here educating people about why it's so important to have these basic documents that are not that expensive in the bigger scheme of things. Of course, I'm not in these days of time with inflation and all that's going on economically. I'm not going to tell someone $1,000 is cheap. It's not. But $1,000 where you may have $20,000 or $30,000 worth of headache with a probate situation because you didn't have the things in order, and now you wait for a court that knows nothing about your family and nothing about the intentions of the person who left these items. So that's important. For our generational wealth, there's a few things that we could touch on. First, entrepreneurship. We spend a lot of time in our community frowning upon entrepreneurship, particularly in our families. We come from a generation that, we grew up seeing celebrities and the P. Diddy's and the Jay-Z's create things from nothing. Our parents did not. So for them, my mom and dad were always scared. Every little business idea or something that someone came to them, we're always afraid because we've heard the horror stories of starting a business. And then we started traditional businesses that make, like the restaurant business. There's nothing wrong with that, but that is a difficult business to maintain. Yes. And so now we're in the age that you can get an LLC really quickly and start a business. So the first thing I would tell people is gift your children with an LLC.
Okay.
Gift your children with an LLC. If they are good at making lemonade, get a general LLC with their name on it. Don't even put a business. My LLC is my name. So if I wake up tomorrow and cycles of life don't work out and I want to flip to something else, I don't have to go back to the Secretary of State to start over. I could just put another subsidiary and say, this is a subsidiary of LaShawn E Mikell LLC. That is why it's set up that way. So I tell people now, of course, when you get your domain names and all those things, yes, you want to make sure and you need to have a business. Kerwin Phillips LLC, and I think yours is a different enterprise. That is not the most sexiest way to get people to buy. People want to identify with something. So, but gift your children with an LLC. The other thing I tell people, get a whole life policy and gift it to your children. So when you have that child, and congratulations to your son that just graduated from college, but that's not all of our kids, and we push our kids more into going to college when they're either not ready or don't really have an interest in this, and we suffocate something that they have an interest in. So you know what our counterparts do? They get whole life policies and different things, and they give $1 million to their child because they started and got a life insurance policy for their children. They went and got the Gerber account or whatever, and they've been paying a life insurance policy for their children since they were born.
Right.
And so instead of gifting your child a new car from high school graduation or when they graduate from college, or some new thing that's not going to last past a certain shelf life, like a car that depreciates as soon as we drive it off the lot, gift them with a whole life policy at 22, set it up so they could draw some money from it and start a business. Because we know there is a possibility that businesses are going to fail, but if you have a cushion to start a business in the first place, that you don't have to go into a bank and ask for a traditional loan, then you will set your child up far better than buying them a car or the newest, latest technology that they want at the time. So we have to just preach to our children, and we're showing them by example now. Me, you, and so many of our friends are setting up businesses now. So we can show children that, yes, there's nothing wrong with traditional college education. We know that. But we think about people who are really holding the wealth in this country.
Right.
The Steve Jobs, the other people in the world, guess what? Didn't even graduate from college. Started out in college, but they graduated college. And as my mom used to tell me, a brick and mortar college or now online will always be here. So at any time, we're quick to tell an athlete that, but we won't tell our young person that graduates from high school, like, okay, well, maybe you need to go get a trade in welding. It opening up a welding business,
right,
which is a rarity for African Americans. In a job that starts you out making $70,000 and you don't have a high school, you barely have a high school diploma, or you just graduated from high school, or air traffic patrol or whatever, or security. I dated a guy for years who did security, and I was like, won't you start a business? You're very good at security, but he thought someone was frowning upon him being a security guard. I was like, everybody is not going to be an athlete or entertainer. Some of us going to have regular businesses. And if we want to see the Black Wall Street again, that we keep hearing about 100 years later that happened in Tulsa, it has to start with those kind of things. And we have to train our children's minds to start businesses, whatever it is. Selling slime. My nieces were selling slime. I still don't even understand that. I was like, is this just like the new wage Play-Doh? But again, it's just getting them in the mindset of you can turn something into nothing. I tell people, Pinky Cole is a good example. Didn't graduate from college, now a millionaire, had a failed business, those things. So I tell people, do that. Also, read books about financial wealth and growth. We do not do that enough. And now we can do audiobooks, so if you're not a person who got time to read 100 pages, well, listen to 50 pages while you sit in traffic. I know in Atlanta traffic, I have plenty of time. I could probably finish a whole book. But read some books that talk about that. So that's something we need to give our children. Right. Again, setting up things in our financial lives that will assist them, making them co-signers on credit cards, getting them already established with credit and teaching them money management. That is a big thing. It teaches them how to save. You're giving your child an allowance or your child is working, set up something that they auto deposit. I didn't start auto deposit until I was probably in my 30s. And I keep telling people, you lose the game when you start that because, it was just about the now and pay the bills and pay whatever. And instead of teaching you long roll, long goal savings, because again, finance and capital is the biggest obstacle we have to start businesses. And we can set our children up because if you think about Hiltons and all those things. These people are living off a 200-300 year of wealth, or 50, 60, 70 year generational wealth. And in our community, we good if we have 10 years of wealth, or we're one generation and we're rich but not wealthy. And that has to be the difference. And putting your money in sustainable items, not being afraid to invest. That's another thing that we struggle with. We are scared to take a chance. Oh my God, the Dow crashed 1,000 points, but it's going to come back up. And a lot of us have 401ks that we're putting money in blindly, and we have no idea how they're investing. But then we won't put an investment and start some investment clubs. I know Morgan Stanley had one for years that a lot of people in the DMV area was participating in. Start an investment club and start looking into these things. Get a financial planner. A lot of times, some of us just don't have the acumen, and we need to do that. But as far as our children, the first thing I tell people, get your child an LLC, give them that as a business. I have a friend that's in the DMV area. She does real estate, and she gave both of her sons LLCs.
Wow.
At 21.
It's funny. I guess I have this conversation with a few of my friends, always speaking about, access to information. Whereas, like in the past, a lot of us within our community didn't have access to this information about financial literacy and all the topics in which you're covering right now. But now we're in the age of information, where we have the Googles and the YouTubes and, so many, the TikToks, depending upon how you use social media, we now have access to all this, financial information, stocks and investing and real estate and, trust and things of that sort. It's just about us taking advantage of what we have access to now.
And not being afraid to reach out and get the assistance. I think the big thing is people always think it's a money grab. I have not made $1 off my social media. I have not made $1 off of that. The things that people are contacting me for is nothing. Every month I do a different topic, and it is not always estate planning. Next month I'm going to talk about side hustles, because that's another thing. We're giving years and years and years, and we won't create multiple streams of income. I did a whole month about that a couple of months ago. One job is not enough in these days of time if you are trying to build generational wealth. It's just not going to work. And working in 9 to 5 and pressing the clock, it is not going to work, because these jobs are not loyal. I don't care if you work for the Postal Service, the government. I don't care who you're working for. The Postal Service is in millions of dollars worth of debt. So that cushy job that our parents, our grandparents had, that does not exist anymore. My dad worked at a corporate job for 30 years. That does not exist anymore. Most of the places that he's worked, all of them are closed. He worked at factories. We're in a technological time, and we have to prepare our children. And the thing is, our children are there. It is us and generations back who influences our children who are not pushing and move the needle. My nieces are on TikTok every day. I have no idea. They have a dance. They are learning something on TikTok every day. And as you said, instead of us using social media for good, we're using it for a lot of wasted time. And believe me, I like a little frolic and a little fun myself. I like a little music. I like a little all the things. But, what I'm in tune to is seeing you talk every day. Those little 5 minutes is enough to get someone started. And that's the thing. We're trying to break away the intimidation of this, because I'm not there. I tell people there's things that I'm talking about that I'm still in the process of learning and doing and incorporating in my own life. But I do have savings. I do have a whole life plan. I do have life insurance. I do have a will. I do have all these things in place. So I'm not coming out at a place, but I do have concerns about my 401k. That's been losing money for the last 2 quarters. And I need to really start investing in something else. And I tell people all the time, I got a whole bunch of money in it now, but what happens if it crashes? Remember Enron. Our kids don't remember Enron. We remember Enron. We were matriculating through school and coming through college when Enron occurred. But these kids don't know anything about Enron. And of course, our parents are still telling us, be safe, be safe, be safe. And that's because the history with us in this country, but also the things we do to ourselves. We have to start circulating our own dollars. And I tell people, I try to buy as many African-American things as possible. People that come into my home are African-American. And that's no disrespect to any other group, because I, of course, work. There's things that only certain groups have monopolies on it. I get that. But from my air to my lawn to everything, they're Black men. Right. And that's purposeful for me because for them, this is creating generational wealth. And also, too, we have to get our kids involved in what we're doing so they can take over it. Right. We think about the Russell family and those things in Atlanta who have built so many buildings, Herman Russell. And I tell people, you read the story about Herman Russell and how much he has built all the way around Atlanta, his children are now running that business, which is a $1 billion business. And the one thing I hate that, you know, speaking about the Black enterprise, you know, conference that you attended, I hate that we don't have the periodical coming out every month like we used to have. Someone gifted me a subscription to Black Enterprise for a birthday gift. And I still get things from Black Enterprise. And of course, I'm on all their listservs now since they've come electronic. I like a paper document and reading a book, but I know that there's electronic things. But so many things, like I couldn't wait to see the 100 Black companies, top companies in the United States, because that's so important, because we have to see it to understand that we can achieve it. And I know that's cliche and corny, but that is the truth. And the thing is that we have to make sure that we're passing on to the Gen Z generation that is all over the place, that they can start things. But I think they don't have the fear. But again, it's the exposure and the education. And I think that's what we are here to do as elders now, or young elders, to teach the next generation.
Young elders.
The young elders.
Even though it's, you know, I joke around, but it's still a blessing to be at this stage. I know a lot of us who didn't get a chance to reach this stage. So
that's it.
You know.
But we got to spread it on, and it starts in our house, and you know, with our children, and children that's in our sphere of influence. So if you don't have children, you can influence them, and you know, just doing these types of things, I think helps. But you know, as you said, you just have to, you know, make it exciting and palpable to them. But with your own children, you know, as our parents used to say, you're gonna listen to this a little bit, you know, and believe me, you don't think they're catching on, but they're watching us. Your actions speak so much louder than your words. And I tell people, your actions are speaking for you, even when you're not speaking the word out your mouth. And so your children see you doing this and hustling and doing all the things that you're doing. Trust me, one of them is going to pick this up. One of them is going to pick it up. And it may not be Malik's first job enterprise, but it could be something else that's in the entrepreneur spirit. And I think that is one of the surefire ways to get generational wealth, for sure.
Yes, ma'am. So for people who want more information and get in contact with you, how can they do so?
Well, the first thing is I have a Facebook page. I have a link tree on my page. So you could just go to my Facebook page, which is LaShawn E Mikell. I have a consultation job form up there. So if you fill that form out, it comes to me. We do a consultation. That's the first thing. Of course, if you join and like my page, I don't have a private page where you have to answer any questions. You get on that page, you'll have access to my financial and estate planning tidbits that I do a video every week. And then I do static posts Tuesday through Friday, and just trying to educate people. There's now over a year worth of videos, so you can go back and I talk about wills and trust. This month, I'm talking about life insurance, because again, I think that is such a vital piece that we do not stress enough. A lot of us have listened to other financial gurus that tell us you don't need life insurance. It's not a benefit, but it is a benefit if you know how to utilize it. And so that was my goal, to talk about life insurance, because it's not just for death. If you get the right type of life insurance with the right life insurance guidance and an agent and someone who knows how to do this, it can wind up being beneficial to you in the short term, and shorter than you think. So
quick question in terms of life insurance. Now, there's a lot of debate between term and whole life. What's your thoughts on that?
I think you should have a combination.
Okay.
The first thing I tell people is, now for a person like me who is single with no children, the old proverbial thought is you don't need a whole life. Mm-hmm. Term life will probably do it. The problem is that if you have a home, I just bought a new home, and if the people you leave it to or your family. I mean, my dad is, and he's an elder. My dad is 80 years old. So the reality is he does not have the income to pay the mortgage for this house and maintain it. Now, of course, he can quick sell it and all those things, but for people who have children, particularly minor children, or or you're the only breadwinner in your home, a whole life policy is going to be more beneficial to you. You can also borrow off of it while you are alive for other things, and also a term life. So I say get a combination. My life insurance agent told me to get what it would take to pay off your living. So what will your home cost? I'm not talking about your car and all those things, because we know those are things of no value. But your home. Do you have a business succession plan and you need money to fold into your business if you go? So those kinds of things. So that's why I say get a combination of both, and think about how much will it take to replace your salary. If you pass away, you have minor children, how much is it going to maintain for your family to maintain in their family home that they're currently in? And also for all the plans, or if they're in private school and all those things, to be able to maintain that with just one income. And for some families, the husband may be, or the wife or the partner, I don't want to leave anybody out, it may be a one income home. And so you definitely want to consider those things in place. So I would say get a combination. I have a combination. The thing is, term life is the quickest and easiest to get. I definitely would recommend one whole life for your children and a term life. The younger you are, the better health you are in, whole life is not going to be massively expensive. When you start trying to get whole life and you're almost 50 and 60, you're running into a greater expense. Term life, I would tell people, get term life for your burial and any debt that you leave behind. Because all of that is accessible now. There's not, credit card debt doesn't go away, all those things. And, I know what people always say, well, I'm just going to withdraw the money out the bank account and let them try to catch me. Well, if you have property and other things, you don't want predators putting liens on your property or land somewhere, because I promise you, they'll find it. And then your family is now fighting to pay off, if it's manageable. So that's what you should use your term life for. It is cheap. And what I don't want to see is GoFundMe's. That's what I don't want. So start off with $10,000, $25,000 for everybody in your household. Get a term life. Whole life, think about what you need and based on what you need and what you're willing to pay, and also what your health is. Because if you are in bad health, I probably wouldn't get a term life, because it's going to be massively expensive. If you are in marginal, manageable health, they're going to check your blood pressure and all those things that you get a physical on anyway. If you're in pretty decent health, it's still going to cost you depending on how much you want. I started out with a $10,000 whole life policy, and then I increased it. And so, over time. And the good thing about the whole life policy that I have is that the price is not going to go up. Term life, the price goes up every time you turn the generational age. So I have a term life policy they just wrote, but they was like, well, because you're now in the 45 to 50 bracket. Right. We're not going to sting you. We didn't want to do it to you during the pandemic, but you turned 45 during the pandemic, and now we're going to get you. And so term life is still not as expensive as my whole life policy, but I have a combination of both, so my family can easily pay off some stuff and then utilize that money for something else, whether it's put in a business, for my niece's college education, etc. So I tell people, get a combination of both, but see what your family financially needs to continue on in the event of your death. And that's the most important thing, and what you can financially afford. There's no need to get the $500 a month whole life policy if y'all are struggling to pay your bills. No, that's why I tell people, initially get a term life and make sure you have insurance separate from your job. Yes. Because if you're getting something through your job, it probably will stop if you leave your job. So if your side business blows up and you're like, you know what? I'm going to make me some sloppy toppy burgers or whatever you're into, and you're making a bunch of money and you're like, I'm gonna leave. And you're assuming that policy is going to transfer with you because everything else has vested. Oh, I was with the company for 15 years. I know they're going to give me something to bury me. not necessarily. Get a
Exactly.
separate additional policy and get something away from your job.
Right.
Even if you buy additional coverage, get something away from your job, because I have 2 policies with my job, but if I quit my job tomorrow, it's gone.
Right.
It's gone. And so that is why it's important to get something separate from your job. But I would recommend to start off, get a term life policy, because unfortunately you do not get a text that you're going to die tomorrow. So please get a term life policy to start off, and get policies for insurance for children as young as possible. You know, it's amazing to me how many people have lost children. It's like, I never thought to get a policy on them. My parents has had a policy on my sister and I since we were small children. Get a life insurance policy. And guess what? They cashed it out. Now, it wasn't worth anything because we didn't pass away. Because that's the thing about term life. You're not going to get any money back either. If you cash it in, it could be $200 and you've invested $10,000 over the years for it. So those are other things. Whole life is going to pay you a little better if you cash out. And then you can borrow off the value. So if you have $100,000 worth of whole life and you need to take $20,000 out because you need a roof, as long as you're paying into it, and after a certain amount of time and you kind of vested in, that $20,000 will just be subtracted away from your $100,000. You do not have to pay it back. Your family will get $80,000 of your death payout versus the $100,000. So that is a way to look at it. That's why it's considered a quasi investment.
Yeah, right. So again, thank you for
You're
taking
welcome.
time out your busy schedule to join us today and sharing so many financial tidbits and the whole breakdown about the trusts and the wills and stuff like that. And you know, I'm sure the audience appreciates your knowledge that you shared with us today. Right?
And as I said, I had 5 points to tell them that they could do. I can run them down really quickly if I still have some time. So the 5 things you could do now to get started on your estate planning. Of course, we've talked about it. Life insurance for sure.
Right.
Getting your important documents. So at least get a will, at least get a power of attorney, at least get an advance directive. As I said, a trust is a little more expensive and a little more consideration for that. Do an inventory list. We talked about that. We also talked about making sure you have identified your executor/executrix and your beneficiaries. Make sure those are identified. And lastly, have a guardianship plan for your children. You cannot will your children. So you cannot say, Kerwin can't call me and say, well, I want you to take my kids.
Right.
Me and my wife decided. That's not how it works. You can't put it in the will. What you need to do is have someone identified, ask the person if they want to do it. You know, don't be like Michael Jackson that put Diana Ross and didn't call her. You know, she was like, I'm 500 years old. I can't take 3 young children. So again, consult with the person. Make sure you have some resources for the person to take on the kids, or they have resources. And also you will have to go to a courthouse and do a guardianship. So that will have to occur once one of you pass away. The other person says, you know what, I'm not going to take care of kids, or God forbid, both of you pass away in a catastrophic accident. Then you have someone identified. They can then go to probate court and get custody of your children, but they need to know that, and you need to have a conversation with them. And that guardianship plan should be incorporated into your will, but you cannot physically put in a will, I want to leave my children to this person. It's a different process. So those are the 5 things I tell people to do now that cost you no money to start. And then once you go to the estate planner, whether that's me or someone else, then you have some tools and some identifiable things for them to start working with.
Okay, great. Again, thanks again for joining us today. You can find LaShawn on Facebook.
Yep.
Just you can search her name and she'll come up, and you'll see that beautiful smile. Go ahead and follow her online, and take in the tidbits that she shares on her page. All right.
Yeah.
All right. So thanks again, and we'll see you all next week.
Thank you.
All right. Malik's First Job, Financial Principles for Teens, is an excellent resource to get your children started on understanding the basics of financial literacy. This book, which is set in Brownsville, Brooklyn, about a young man who gets his first job and then shortly thereafter sits down with his dad to learn how to manage his money. There are several topics that are covered within this work, such as paying yourself first, disciplining your spending, knowing the difference between an asset and a liability, creating multiple sources of income, as well as the importance of being charitable. So again, if you want to get your children started on understanding finance and becoming responsible adults, we highly recommend that you purchase the book, Malik's First Job, Financial Principles for Teens. So please visit maliksfirstjob.com to get more information. Peace.
Generational wealth.